All right, well, welcome back, everybody. I hope that you're enjoying your afternoon sessions here at the Z Prime Research WE3 Summit. We're having a great time. I'm sure you guys checked out the yoga as well as the demo booths. If you haven't had a chance, be sure that you do go check out the booths. We have some really great exhibitors out there that will probably really resonate with what you're looking for and what you'd like to see out of an awesome summit such as this. Anyways, I'm really excited to introduce this next session on future-proofing water and energy regulations. And with that, I'm going to kick things over to David. David, take us away.
Hey, Joyce, thank you for the handoff. Ladies and gentlemen of the virtual audience, we have a treat for you this afternoon. We have three incredibly knowledgeable and insightful panelists, in Catherine and Lorraine and Karla. And, policy and regulation can be a very kind of lightning bolt issue, right? And it can get things, somewhat stirred up. But oh my God, the passion that our panelists bring to this topic is evidence from the pre-call we had with them. They'll be able to go toe-to-toe with anybody. So we're looking for a really fun session today. We'd like for them to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get to the heart of the matter. So Lorraine, could you please start us off?
Thank you, David. And I want to thank the Z Prime team for the opportunity to be here today with my fellow dynamic Wonder Woman panelists and David as well as our moderator. Aloha, everyone. I am Lorraine Akiba from Hawaii. I am a former commissioner with the State of Hawaii Public Utilities Commission. So my sister, Catherine Sandoval, was also a commissioner on the Public Utilities Commission for California at the same time. So there's a sisterhood here. But now I am a president and CEO of my own consultancy firm, LHA Ventures, and I provide senior policy advisory services on both regulatory and energy policy, and also advise clients internationally and nationally on corporate environmental, social, and governance goals and metrics. So I'm looking forward to a great dynamic conversation today. Thank you.
Catherine?
Great. Hello, everybody, and great to see all of you, and great to see you again, Lorraine. My name is Catherine Sandoval. I'm a former commissioner of the California Public Utilities Commission and had the honor and pleasure of serving at the same time as Commissioner Akiba. So we had the opportunity to collaborate on a number of issues about renewable energy, sustainability, reliability, and water, and the water energy nexus. I'm a law professor at Santa Clara University, which is a Jesuit university in the Silicon Valley. I teach energy law and communications law, as well as contracts and antitrust law. And my energy law class contains modules on the water energy nexus and various issues about climate change that are affecting all of us. So really look forward to our discussion today. So thank you very much.
Karla?
Good afternoon, everyone. It is wonderful to be here, especially with these terrific panelists, and I too look forward to a great conversation about a topic that I know is really at the forefront in everything we do in the utility sector. I am the director of the California Department of Water Resources. I was initially appointed in 2018 by Governor Jerry Brown, and then reappointed by Governor Newsom in June of 2019. The Department of Water Resources, we are a water resources planner for the state. We do have some regulatory responsibilities in the water world with our Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which passed in the throes of the last drought in California. But we also operate the largest water utility, which is called the State Water Project, which moves water from the northern part of California, really the northern corner of California, to the Bay Area, down through our Central Valley, and really all the way to the border of Mexico. That water supply serves 27 million Californians. So it's a really significant part of water affordability in California, but it's also a big energy user here in California. We do work with local water agencies in their planning, and there's a lot of that water energy nexus that happens at that level, certainly here in California.
Okay, thank you, Karla. And just a little bit about your moderator, not to kind of bring the crowd down here, but I'm the managing director for Bridgewater Consulting. We're based out of California. We're a full service consulting organization, and basically a bunch of gray-haired utility guys and some younger, but have been around the industry for 25, 30 years, and hopefully, in a position to kind of give back to the industry. And being a consultant, we're sort of always forced to look things up. And, looking back at the title of this session, it's future-proofing policy and regulation. The other thing about being a consultant, we tend to always think we know what everything means. In this case, I'd have missed that question. So I'm gonna go give you the book definition for future-proofing to kind of to level set this and start it. And future-proofing is the process of anticipating the future and developing methods of minimizing the effects of shocks and stresses of future events. And I think as we've heard previous today and going through this discussion, we've had lots of shocks and stresses on the water and energy industry over the past few years. And looking forward, we can pretty much identify more shocks and stresses to come. So kind of having started off with that, a very relevant topic about, how do we address these foreseeable shocks and stresses? And then, how do we do things from a regulatory and policy perspective to help hopefully get in front of them and not repeat some of the mistakes of the past? And we cut this up in kind of three buckets: sustainability, resiliency, and then social equity. So Catherine, I'd ask for you maybe to start and just, when you think about sustainability and the impacts that policy and regulation can have on it, kind of related back to this future-proofing concept, what are your thoughts?
So I think, first of all, and several of the panels before us have talked about this, just getting real about the facts, recognizing climate change and how that will have effect on things such as water supply. So under Governor Brown and continued with Governor Newsom, that Karla and the Department of Water Resources, as well as the state water boards and CPUC, have been at the forefront of really trying to do planning with the water agencies and utilities around the state to really ensure that we are looking at how do we make our water resources sustainable. But at the same time, as you look at things like both population growth and the planet getting hotter, more wildfires, we just basically really are facing a sustainability problem. As you look at things heating up, there's going to be less snowpack, and that's part of what we've counted on for our water resources. So we have a water resources problem, we have an aging infrastructure problem, and then I think we also have some regulatory paradigm problems. And so part of the regulatory paradigm problem is that I think that a lot of the regulatory paradigm tends to focus on what we've done in the past, and that works, and it's cheap. But we're also getting to the point where just, quick, for example, last week, my neighbor said that in the morning they saw some water pooling on our lawn. And it was only happening in the morning. So I was really concerned that we had a big leak. Well, it turned out to be the sprinkler system. But this is exactly why when I was on the PUC, I advocated for let's at least authorize the water utilities to consider whether smart water meters make sense. Because if we had a smart water meter, it would have notified me within 24 hours, hey, are you using water for the whole 24-hour cycle? Because most people don't use water continuously for 24 hours. Glendale has been doing that for years. But, are we doing enough to introduce the level of smartness that we now have for our dishwashers into our water management?
Thanks, Catherine. Karla, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. So one of the things that to me is pretty fascinating about water in California, and especially this sort of mashup of water energy nexus, is the energy sector, I think, is a generation ahead of the water sector in terms of really integrating with customer use and using some of these sort of softer tactics to influence, social behavior that, achieves a collective goal. And part of the reason for that is, certainly water in California is, it's far more aligned with a typical kind of property rights system. So there are a lot of sacred cows in how you manage and regulate water in California. And I think we have a lot to learn from our brethren, if you will, in the energy sector. And I think climate, the overarching challenge of managing through climate change, is going to force the water sector to almost skip a generation and get right to the heart of the matter. And so on the climate perspective, there's a couple of things. One, I think we are going to see a lot of changing precipitation patterns in California. So for a long time, a lot of our planning has been around average, what's an average water year look like? And we got to do away with that kind of approach, because what we really need to focus on are the extremes. We know we're going to have more extreme drought. It's going to last longer. We're going to have higher precipitation events that are going to intensify. And a lot of our planning up until this point in time has been, sort of these gross averages over time. And that's not going to tell us what we need to do, relative to investing in rehabilitating existing aging infrastructure, but also investing in new infrastructure that can work better. When I think about issues of sustainability, of course, a couple things come to mind. One, with our big utility, the State Water Project, as the biggest water user, we do have goals to get to zero emissions by 2045. Right now, we're at about 65%. It's hydro and solar, but we do have a couple new solar projects underway that we anticipate will be in service by 2022. And all that, we've got 15 years, and we're working really hard to get to a zero emission system, which would be significant for an enormous water utility that provides water to 27 million Californians. So that's one piece of the sustainability kind of equation. The other piece is, how do we relate to our environment and ecosystems? And climate, of course, is a huge challenge. Just rising temperatures, rising ambient temperature raises air temperature. And so a lot of the things that we think about in the context of the regulatory environment is not only, how do we, manage our water supplies and do them in a way that really supports sustainability, but what do we need to do for these ecosystems, and how do we need to look at really landscape scale kinds of ecosystem restoration, and that the regulatory frameworks for environmental protection really do need to embrace that kind of landscape scale, given the enormity of the challenge. So those are the things that I think about, and I think about the water sustainability and some of the unique issues that we have here in California.
And thank you, Karla. Lorraine, and then I'm gonna have a follow-up question for you. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to add a couple more comments here in terms of from an island perspective. And Karla and Kathy both come from California, and they've got the panoply of every single climate change impact that you could probably list. From an island perspective, we are actually, as island people, many of the islands that are globally facing the same thing, we are at ground zero for climate change, with sea level rise, extreme weather coming through, whether it's hurricanes, typhoons, rain bombs, and also facing aging infrastructure on island ecosystems without any ability to reach out to another neighboring state or jurisdiction for any relief or help. And so each ecosystem has to be dealt with as, fresh water supplies, because many islands have a fresh water supply by, rainwater and aquifers that then need to be recharged and replenished. And so it is definitely a daunting task and rising up to the occasion for sustainability. But I'd like to share some lessons learned and some best practices from Hawaii in terms of, I think if in fact we draw down actually from Native Hawaiian culture and Native Hawaiian values. The word for water in Hawaii is Wai, W-A-I, which means water, but it also means life. And Native Hawaiian peoples and Polynesian voyaging societies that went around the world globally back in ancient times practiced sustainability. They managed, as you know, what Karla's talking about, they managed the whole ecosystem from the top of the mountain all the way down to the ocean. It was called an ahupuaha, and they were very conscious of not over, utilizing resources, of replenishing resources. And so some of this has come back in terms of Hawaii, getting back to those Native Hawaiian values of sustainability and stewardship. And within our own constitution, we have the public trust doctrine, which basically states by law that all public natural resources, of which water is included, are held in trust, the public trust doctrine, by the state for the benefit of the people of Hawaii. And so the Maoli, which is the Hawaiian word for people. So there was an ambitious plan that was put together by the Hawaii Freshwater Council to, to do some of the things like recharge, reuse, and conservation, initially stop using so much fresh water. What we do use, can we reuse for other purposes? And how can we recharge our freshwater supply? And a very, thoughtful plan that took private sector and public sector input. So it's not always just the regulators that have a role. I think industry, the private sector, individual citizens and community have a role to play in really changing the paradigm. And I think the opportunity now with the clean energy transition, in the middle of every crisis, I love that. I think it was Einstein that said, in the middle of every crisis rises an opportunity. And this is it. We've got innovative, creative, next generation thought leaders in our communities that are, coming up with technology tools and different ways of doing things. And regulators, I think, have to be able to facilitate the framework so that we can incorporate some of these new tools and be sustainable and have water resources for the future, as well as deal with the, the pressing issues. And the renewable energy and clean energy developments are the ample opportunity. It addresses what Karla is saying. If water and wastewater plants can use more renewable energy, which is cheaper and cleaner, they can also be part of the customer base. They are from the largest customers on the electric grid. So they can provide demand side management resources to help bring more renewable energy on. If we are looking at their role in it, they can be the key stakeholder to help us bring more renewables on, while we also make their operations more efficient and less costly. Because for most water and wastewater utilities, the highest cost that they have to deal with is energy costs. So there's definitely an energy, and water nexus, or water energy nexus, and it's intensifying as these issues come to the forefront. But there is an opportunity to do it better, to pivot, to reset, and I think COVID has given us that opportunity to rethink in both sectors.
Well, thank you for that great segue, Lorraine, because the next thing I was going to say, I think this was a political tenet to begin with, but it goes something like, we should never waste a good crisis. So we'll make this sort of a toss-up question, but given COVID and given the I guess maybe the violent nature, but the fact that everybody has been blasted out of their routines and their thought process and their baggage from the past about these things can be done, these things can't be done. There appears to be a much more kind of global openness about thinking about change and about how we can change things for the better. So I guess part one of the question, you did kind of agree with that. Are you seeing the same things? COVID presents a kind of a base opportunity in the way people think about things and their willingness to change. And then from, potential policy or regulatory perspective, how do we take advantage of the opportunity and not the crisis to move that forward?
Who wants to jump? I'll jump in on that one then. Yeah, I think COVID is a great opportunity, like I said, to reset, to pivot, to re-engineer our processes. And I think that it is really the responsibility of, being a former regulators to have that vision as well alongside with their policymakers and decision makers to be able to implement those changes quickly. And what has happened is it has allowed the opportunity, because usage has gone down in all sectors, whether it's transportation or energy or water, as people stay home, you can do certain things now. I mean, energy efficiency, and using more of that to buy ourselves time while we bring more renewable energy resources on, while we try to smarten up the water infrastructure or improve water infrastructure. As we look at, I know this goes into the resilience, and resilience is top of mind, and resilience is really important under climate change. We saw what happened in Puerto Rico when there was lack of water and water infrastructure. More people died from that and lack of energy for hospitals and medical resources than did from the hurricane. So, it is very important to society's survival and to community survival for there to be a robust energy water nexus and availability. And so this can give rise to new ways of doing things. I know in California and Hawaii, we're looking at microgrids where we can keep energy and water, critical infrastructure up together with more distributed energy resources, using solar, using, some other, backup storage. And as we move to 100% decarbonization, because of the goals we set to be resilient and sustainable, we won't have diesel backup. We won't have diesel gensets anymore. When Hawaii has to go 100% decarbonized, as does California, there won't be a diesel genset, for the water utility. It'll have to be other strategies of whether that's going to be, battery storage, or it's going to be hydrogen fuel cells. But this is the opportunity now where we can test those things out. We can put them into place incrementally. We can begin to use the technology. And because of renewable energy, renewable hydrogen is becoming a big factor for resilience. And California is currently leading the way, as well as the European Union in deploying some of these strategies. I think LEDWP has started, some of this with respect to doing a renewable hydrogen retrofit with Intermountain Power. But, it's something that the water sector can do too, as well as in hospitals. To have a hydrogen fuel cell technology backup, provides days of backup power, not hours, not a lithium ion battery. So, and water, reusing water that can no longer be potable water is a great source potentially for hydrogen to be produced from electrolyzers. So, you can't reuse that water for drinking water, because it hasn't been treated, but maybe you could reuse it for industrial uses. So there's a lot of opportunities for resilience, strategies coming out of COVID now that we have a little bit of time, a timeout, and both sectors can take a look at using existing tools in the toolkit, new technology, and going, to a different place, a different vision.
Yeah. So Karla, would you, I guess, agree, or your thoughts on it, or are you seeing just among your colleagues even a willingness to change the way we think?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, the word that really popped into my mind listening to Lorraine's points, which are all terrific ones, is integration, right? So how do the next, regulatory paradigm needs to be something that, supports further integration of water, wastewater, and energy. And Lorraine just brought up several key ways in which we can do it and achieve those benefits. In California, we do our public bonds, and before COVID hit and our economy was a little bit more robust, we were contemplating a climate resiliency bond. And, one of the major themes coming out of that was, from a funding perspective, can you incentivize this degree of necessary integration? And putting dollars out there has a great way of, pushing people together, right, out of necessity. We've seen it with some of just the water specific programs that we have, where it's really forced a regional collaboration so that we can develop regional local self-reliance around water. I do want to say, and Catherine, I bet, has some insights on this as well, no question, but we had a pretty wild summer here in California. So we had rolling blackouts. And in that context, the State Water Project was shifting its load. We were doing a lot of load shedding, making sure that we were moving water when we had renewables available. We were avoiding those peak hours and the evening hours to help with that set of problems. We went from that sort of grid instability, if you will, right into wildfires and public safety power shutdown. And the water utility world has a role to play there too. One being, again, making sure that we're providing energy, hydropower to the grid as a backup energy source in the context of these public safety power shutdowns. And that, I think there is an opportunity. There's a lot of tension here in California about dams and hydropower and environmental issues and our salmon populations. How do we make that work? But I think the necessity of moving off of fossil fuels is going to instigate a renewed conversation about what could that look like in a way that's more sustainable. Like, we really need to be looking at all of these energy sources and figuring out, it's going to be a bit of everything that's integrated into this reliable grid. And we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and get a little bit more detailed into those kinds of conversations. And then the third point I would make over our wild summer here in California is a lot of water utilities have a real role to play in upper watershed management, fuel loading. So part of the frustration, I think, in California is that these wildfires emit so much CO2, way more than anything else we're doing. And so there's a lot of intense effort. We've got our combustion engine regulation, but man, when we have these massive wildfires, it really does set us back. And the water industry really has a role to play in handling fuel loading in these watersheds. There's that water quality nexus. That's a real part of water supply and social equity issues around water quality in California. And all of that came from like a lot of motivation in a 6-week period over the summer that was very tough. It theoretically and conceptually, but man, did the rubber hit the road there.
Yeah, you said wild. I'm thinking epic, biblical, apocalyptic. Yes. But Catherine, you've heard. And from your previous positions, I'm gonna call it, heard a lot of the arguments, both pro and cons over the years. Does all these shocks to the system, is there an opportunity there, like I said before, to kind of change the conversation? Are people that always had their heels so dug in, they weren't, ready to listen or compromise or integrate? Is that conversation finally changing?
Yes, and I actually see that as well with my students. So we had just started the law semester when the blackouts happened in California, and then I had several students who, a few of them, poor things, got evacuated a couple of times. One of them, they were lucky that the house that they were renting didn't burn down, but then when they came back, all of the utilities were out for a while. They actually got electricity and internet back before they got water, and then they were doing jugs of water and and sponge baths. But this is where you have the COVID overlay, right? They couldn't go to the gym, right, to take a shower because of COVID. And so, there are all of these overlays. And my students, I find, are much more willing to say, why in the world are we still doing things that way, right? So I've been asking this about some of the ways that we deal with utility poles. Like, why are some of the utilities still using the spray paint can to mark when a pole needs to be removed? Have you all heard of sensors, right? So, but I think that there are things that we need to be thinking about. So to the word of integration, I agree. And I would add to integrating water, wastewater, and energy, of course, communications. So I just saw yesterday a story about artificial intelligence as a way to integrate a virtual power plant in California that's also going to be harnessing the batteries in California. But the thing is that, like, the AI is just part of the analytical background. Okay, that power plant is working because of communications, right? It's because of the internet. And so are we really paying sufficient attention as well to policy related to the internet, both governance policy, and these are issues at the FCC and also with the state, as well as cybersecurity issues, right? Because without the internet, that virtual power plant is impossible. And then there's the second way of communicating, which is also talking with the public. And Diane Krieger was also talking previously about public engagement, right? So it's really, the multi-platform dialogue. But for example, one thing that people don't think about, and I think that could be done more, is okay, when energy is really tight, part of the messaging should be, please don't water your lawn. Okay, like most people wouldn't think of, you don't look at your lawn and see
Yeah.
energy, right? But but watering your lawn ramps up the demand for pumping, which is where most of the water utilities use water. So really helping to develop that messaging about simple actions that people can take to shift their behavior. And again, really harnessing the Internet of Things so that some of that could be done automatically, right? And that so we actually are able to get visibility into use down to the level of not just energy, but also water. And then to be able to do essentially that auto demand response that would mean that, therefore we don't have to have blackouts and that we're also able to sustain our watershed. The last thing I'll say is that I agree with Lorraine that we also really need to learn from native management. I was very fortunate to have, really again through the wonders of the internet, the chair of the CPUC tribe spoke to my energy class, and also spoke to our environmental law society about tribal ways of forest management, which is something that we really need to look at, particularly as also you take another look at some of those dams, which frankly produce less power than a good sized carport. So we really need to think about what we're doing, and look at things like, it was in one of the previous panels, they talked about now the new ARPA-I at DOE innovation. I'd love to see one innovation target would be, what can we do to replace the diesel generator? So I know some people have been working on some innovative things with that, but if we could replace the diesel generator, that would just be a game changer. So I agree that hydrogen is really important. It's going to make sense a lot more, especially in some industrial areas in some cities. But I think that that's really a focused opportunity that could really create some huge shifts that help us for reliability as well as equity.
Completely agree. I'm going to shift gears slightly here, and Karla, I'm going to kind of push this question to you first. But we talked about sustainability, and we think about all the different entities that are required to hold hands to provide us with a sustainable future. All those entities are also going to require some level of financial resiliency. So the next block, I don't think we necessarily thought to talk about it this way, but it's like we have to provide at least a mechanism or a pathway to this financial resiliency so the different entities can continue to provide the services that they do. So any thoughts on how does regulation sort of play into that, or perhaps provide market flexibility, or and we're going to get to social equity, but but just
well, so I think a real hot topic, I think, when I consider, what we need to be doing, relative to, we all like to say, at least in the water world, it's an all of the above strategy, right? There's not one silver bullet. We need to be, investing in aging infrastructure. We need to be investing in water use efficiency and all these things. And I think that sort of one line kind of is starting to outlive its useful life, meaning we need to roll up our sleeves and look at these regional scales, since most water is managed at the local level in California, which is how do we think about the integration of those supplies, where we put our ratepayer dollars? Because what I see happening is a lot of anxiety at the local water district level that if this project moves forward, it's going to crowd out the ability for ratepayers to absorb another project that we also need that has its other attributes. Infrastructure projects are hard to do. It takes a lot of political capital, and so we're at this point in my mind where at the local water district level, we need to really start filling out, what does it mean to do all of the above? What's our resilience metric, if you will? And how much money does it take to do that? And what can we reasonably expect of ratepayers, right? Because it's not, it's not this sort of elastic supply. People are going to keep paying, right? And
Yep.
so, but my view is working with those water districts to do that is a critical step, and then turning to state and federal governments for what is appropriate, broader public funding that can support investments in water infrastructure. So the state, I think, plays an important role in at least the Department of Water Resources, because again, as I mentioned, we're not the big regulator in the state in the water space. That's really the Water Resources Control Board, with the exception of how we manage groundwater. But one of the things we can do is we can incentivize that degree of collaboration, that degree of integration, and be a partner with local water districts around how we look for state and federal funding to support the needed infrastructure investment. One of the key challenges, of course, with water is, you conserve more and then your bills go up because you have all these fixed costs. And it's such a hard sell to the ratepayer that, it's important to do your part and there's a social good when they see it, hitting their pocket. So that is sort of universal. I think one of the problems that we have in California is we have what's called Proposition 218, which really limits the flexibility that these water districts have in articulating a regional resilience strategy that could be funded by water rates. And, certainly in the previous drought in California, there was conversation about, can we deal with that? We would have to deal with that legislatively or even through a constitutional amendment here in California. So that, in my mind, the genesis of that kind of that kind of legal hurdle is, that does reflect the will of the voters. The voters did pass that. And I would think part of why they passed that is because we need to do more in bringing water users and, energy users along in the conversation about, being good stewards of their money. What are people getting for their rates? Why is it important? Really making the case that regional reliance and regional resilience helps everybody, right? And we need to do a lot more work, I think, with a customer base so that they can trust the utilities to have that flexibility in rate setting and doing some things that help share the burden more equitably. And it does run into this social equity idea, but
before we jump there,
happening.
Before we jump there, Lorraine, you live in almost a definitive test case, I will call it, for resiliency in a zero-sum environment. And like you pointed out earlier, you can't, run to Nevada to send me some power today.
Right. Exactly.
So
I think, I think that the concern here is, how do you have a regulatory framework that does all the things that Karla and Kathy have talked about? Well, it has to be flexible enough, but it has to be also be able to quickly approve actions that will incent utilities. And in Hawaii, we regulate, the Public Utilities Commission does regulate private water and wastewater utilities. We don't regulate the county water systems, but we do regulate private water and wastewater facilities. So these issues come up in terms of the integrated energy network, whether that's, energy with water, energy with transportation, energy with telecommunications. So it's all integrated, and we need to be able to look at outcomes. So I think one thing that happens in jurisdictions like ours is we need to get away from the old regulatory paradigms, which is, the rate case and inflexible tariffs, inflexible rates, to really look at more, what are the outcomes we want? We want more resilience. We want more renewable energy. We want affordable, safe, reliable services, whether that's in the energy sector or the water sector. So to the extent the utility can deliver on those metrics and, can save money, maybe they should share in that instead of the old traditional rate case and the inflexibility. And Hawaii is, before I left the commission, we started the performance-based regulation docket. They are almost done with that, where we are now going to try to get away from this traditional rate regulation, rate case structure, ROI, ROE, which kind of traps utilities in that vicious circle of I got to spend CapEx, I got to keep the rates down, instead of looking at what do we want to get as the outcome here? How do we best get there? Can we save money doing it? And utilities should get credit for that. So I put the challenge also out to the financial community, and I know the institutional investors are leading the charge with corporate ESG and telling utilities, public or private, to address climate risk because it is a business risk. And so that affects governance as well as sustainability metrics. But it's something that Wall Street rating agencies need to look at, because you asked, how do we get the money? How do we get to the financing? Well, you shouldn't just be giving utilities brownie points for CapEx spend, that's just infrastructure spend that isn't really achieving the outcome. But you should also give them financing for things that needs to be done. So it's striking that balance. And that's where the decision makers, the policy makers, and the regulators come in to help facilitate that path. And in Hawaii, we don't have swim lanes that we have to worry about. I mean, that's the benefit of being in that Hawaii Public Utilities Commission. I don't have to deal with FERC jurisdiction. I don't have to deal with an RTO ISO. The state does regulate everything, whether that's in the water sector for private water and wastewater utilities, or electric or, gas utilities. So, we don't have to worry about jurisdictional responsibilities like Karla, was very tactful in describing about county, regional, state, and you got federal things if you got hydropower, so we are in that sense a living laboratory for experimenting on what can work. And I think institutional investors, to segue to equity, because I know, we've got the time clock running. Institutional investors are demanding that now. BlackRock, Larry Fink, he's issued numerous white papers that has challenged, these industrial sectors and publicly traded companies, of which many of them are, to, meet the challenge on not just only on climate, for the environmental, for environmental and governance business risks, but the social aspects. So with that, I'll let you,
well, we got about 3 or 4 minutes. Hopefully Joyce and Chrysalis have maybe a couple more. I saved the easy question for you, Catherine. And this is the one that we could have started off on and spent the entire time on, because I think everybody on the panel felt, incredibly passionate or strongly about it. But Catherine, my question is, with this big balancing act that we've been talking about, how do we ensure social equity for everyone?
I think part of it starts with really centering regulation around the people, right? So that often when we talk about regulation, and part of what regulators do is often regulate the utilities. But the problem is that focus seems to be about the utility as opposed to the people that we're trying to serve. So when you focus on the people who you're trying to serve and really understand their needs and communicate with them, I think that's part of how we get to the shift. And then where we also, really look at how can we shift regulatory paradigms. So for example, look at regulatory alignment. So one of the things that we did here in California is we were looking at how could we do things like, you can find out through your Fitbit how many steps you took, but you don't know how much water you used until 2 months later. Well, again, this is where we're really missing opportunities. But we're looking at how could we harness the infrastructure that we've already invested in on the electric side to also help water, in terms of being able to analyze any smart meter type of data for water as well as energy. Well, the answer was actually in aligning regulatory incentives so that you also give the electric companies credit in energy efficiency programs for saving the embedded energy in water, right? So then suddenly that also becomes something that is aligned with the utility purpose, and thus it's something that you can use. So it just took regulatory realignment then to allow something that, again, people recognize they can commonly do. And that fosters equity, because I think when we look at equity, you know, we need to look at access. Okay, there's still people who don't have access to clean water, running water. You need health, obviously. We need reliability, and we also need sustainability for the future. And to get to financing, I think that's going to have to look at how do we get more regional financing, water bonds, other ways of doing financing, because especially where you have districts that are very small water districts, affordability really becomes a problem, and then health and reliability becomes a problem.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think I'm seeing the shepherd's crook slide across the edge of my screen. I wasn't calling you that, Joyce. Panelists, thank you so much. I don't know if there's a way to give a virtual round of applause, but again, appreciate your passion for the subject matter and your insight and being here today. Joyce, back to you.
Yeah, no, thank you all so much, ladies. This was a phenomenal panel. I think you've definitely brought up some really critical things to consider when looking at future-proofing solutions. That's always kind of the big question mark. I mean, funding is always, top of mind for sure, but also making sure that you have technologies or processes in place that scale really well, that also fit where you're at, because I think what you all touched on is that there's a lot of customization based on where you are with the solutions that you're really trying to foster and create. So thank you so much, David, for moderating this. Everyone, the closeout panel is in about a half hour, or I'm sorry, in about an hour. So definitely go check out those demo booths, do all the things that you need to do to get ready for this, because this is going to be one amazing closeout to day one of the WE3 Summit with Z Prime Research. And that fireside chat is going to be on AI applications in this space. So it's going to be thrilling, and I can't wait to close it out with you all. Thank you so much for a great time. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe.